This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Patrick McCaughey, 25 of D.C., is facing 16 years in prison, having been convicted in September at a bench trial for violently assaulting and savagely beating at least 2 police officers during Jan 6. The first one being Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges, who testified before the Jan 6 and testified at Mr. McCaughey's trial in front of Judge Trevor McFadden, a Trump-appointed judge. We're going to talk about him next on this hot take and what my predictions are for how he's going to handle the sentencing and how he's likely to cut the Department of Justice's recommended sentence at least in half. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's first focus our attention on Patrick McCaughey, spelled McGaughey. What did he do that day? Along with 2 of his cohorts, Tristan Stevens and David Mahaffey, he attacked law enforcement and police in some of the most violent and brutal fighting that went on at that Western Terrace Tunnel, particularly Officer Hodges, who had never been to the Capitol before. He was a Met DC police officer, didn't know the layout well, but wanted to protect his democracy, his Capitol from being attacked by what Officer Hodges has called a cult-like group of white supremacists who were fighting for the very soul of our nation. And Officer Hodges was going to do everything in his power, even if it meant giving up his life for our country. And what happened in particular? Well, at that West Tunnel, the site of some of the most brutal and violent war that was being waged to protect democracy, to protect the elected officials inside. Eventually, Mr. McCaughey got Mr. Hodges into a prone position using Mr. Hodges' own shield against him as a battering ram, pushing him into a door, trapping Hodges and attempting to squeeze the life out of him between his shield and his door as he literally screamed out in pain. And what did those screams bring? Other insurrectionists that then proceeded to rip the officer's gas mask off his face in a violent manner, gouge out his eye with a thumb, and all the while McCaughey is not helping this officer who's now prone and vulnerable to attack. He's actually bringing the mob and all of their weight to bear on Hodges to try to crush him. How he survived that violent assault, we'll never know. Fortunately, he had the presence of mind to stay on his post, to fight off dozens of people. I mean, if this was literally during a war, I'm sure he would have been given, if not the Purple Heart, a Congressional Medal of Honor or some other Medal of Valor for what he did and how he protected our country. He testified, Daniel Hodges, in the Jan 6 committee, and we have some amazing testimony from him that I don't even want to describe. I just want to roll the tape and play Daniel Hodges' testimony, at least a minute or 2 of it, so you understand. And just note that everything he's saying in that clip that I chose is about Patrick McCaughey.
So he believed ours to be the last line of defense before the terrorists had true access to the building and to potentially our elected representatives. Eventually, it was my turn in the meat grinder that was the front line. The terrorists had a wall of shields that they had stolen from officers, as well as stolen batons, what other armaments they brought. Even during this intense contest of wills, they tried to convert us to their cult. One man shouted, "We all just want to make our voices heard, and I think you feel the same. I really think you feel the same." All while another man attempts to batter us with a stolen shield. Another man, like many others, didn't seem to appreciate that this wasn't a game. He fought his way across the lawn, up the steps, through the Western Terrace, all the OC and CS gas, and at the front line of this final threshold was asking us to hold on because he has asthma. The 2 sides were at a stalemate at a metal door frame that sat in the middle of the hallway. At the front line, I inserted myself so the frame was at my back in an effort to give myself something to brace against and provide additional strength when pushing forward. Unfortunately, soon after I secured this position, the momentum shifted and we lost the ground that got me there. On my left was a man with a clear riot shield stolen during the assault. He slammed it against me and, with all the weight of the bodies pushing behind him, trapped me. My arms were pinned and effectively useless, trapped against either the shield on my left or the door frame on my right. With my posture granting me no functional strength or freedom of movement, I was effectively defenseless and gradually sustaining injury from the increasing pressure of the mob. Directly in front of me, a man seized the opportunity of my vulnerability. He grabbed the front of my gas mask and used it to beat my head against the door. He switched to pulling it off my head, the straps stretching against my skull and straining my neck. He never uttered any words I recognized, but opted instead for guttural screams. I remember him foaming at the mouth. He also put his cell phone in his mouth so that he had both hands free to assault me. Eventually, he succeeded in stripping away my gas mask, and a new rush of exposure to CS and OC spray hit me. The mob of terrorists were coordinating their efforts now, shouting, "Heave! Ho!" as they synchronized, pushing their weight forward, crushing me further against the metal door frame. The man in front of me grabbed my baton that I still held in my hands, and in my current state, I was unable to retain my weapon. He bashed me in the head and face with it, rupturing my lip and adding additional injury to my skull.
Now you've had an opportunity to hear, right out of the words of the victim, Daniel Hodges, who was so eloquent, so brave, so much valor in his testimony. And he testified again in the trial against McCaughey and his two cohorts, and that was a bench trial. So now we know what he did. We also know he beat another officer with another shield that happened at the same time, and that was Officer Henry Fulas. Beat him also, and he got charged with 24 counts and convicted of 9 counts at a bench trial, not a jury trial. He chose a bench trial. The government was okay with it in front of Trevor McFadden. Why? Because Trevor McFadden was a Trump appointee. He's the only person to have found and acquitted a Jan 6th insurrectionist of a misdemeanor at least, and let him walk out the front door of the courthouse back in April of 2022, and that guy was Matt Martin. No other DC judge has allowed that to happen.
Let's take a quick break to talk about our next partner, ZBiotics. Now, if you're like me, you've probably skipped a workout because of drinks the night before. Like, it happens. But if you're committed to your healthy routine, you need ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut where you need it most. Just remember to drink ZBiotics before drinking alcohol, drink responsibly, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. Now, I can't lie, after we hit 1 million subscribers, I may have partied a little bit too much that night. But luckily, I knew I had ZBiotics. Now, as instructed, I drank a bottle of ZBiotics before any alcohol, and I was amazed at just how good I felt the next day. Give ZBiotics a try for yourself. Go to zbiotics.com/legalaf to get 15% off your first order when you use LegalAF at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So remember, head to zbiotics.com/legalaf and use the code LegalAF at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode.
Now, he's never let a felon be found to be acquitted, so we got that going for us. But even Trevor McFadden, who is notorious in not adopting the Department of Justice's sentencing recommendations and completely throwing them out, not enhancing the sentence in any way, shape, or form, instead cutting it in half. I mean, he even gave Patrick McCaughey a break. You've heard a lot about the Jan 6 choir, which is 20 or more of the most dangerous of the Jan 6 insurrectionists. A group of them have already been convicted, awaiting transfer to the Bureau of Prisons, the federal system. A group of them have already pled guilty or been convicted, and they're awaiting sentencing. And a group of them are awaiting their trial, but are so violent that they can't be let out. This guy who perpetrated some of the most violent beating on video of law enforcement, McFadden allowed him to have a conditional release and serve out his pretrial detention at home, in home confinement. We're talking about that judge, Trevor McFadden, who's now going to be taking the Department of Justice's sentencing memo, the memo that's written by the defense, and who apparently, now that they've lost on obstruction of an official proceeding, that's what McFadden found McCaughey guilty of, and counts related to felony assault with a deadly weapon of law enforcement. And that's 9 of those counts relate all to that. They lead to some of the highest sentences under the sentencing guidelines for the federal system. And when you add to it the required enhancements based on the conduct, the police officer was restrained at the time he was beaten. That's an enhancement. That gets you a worse sentence under the guidelines. If you lie on the stand, and McCaughey, the beauty that he is, lied on the stand and said he was merely helping the officer with his mask at one point, trying to make him feel better, as opposed to continuing to assault him. And the video, of course, in the testimony of Hodges, who had a very clear memory of him being beaten and how he was beaten, was completely counter to the lies told by McCaughey on the stand. So don't tell even this judge, even a Trumper judge, that you're merely helping the cop as you're crushing the life out of him with his own shield. And that's a point against you, literally, under the sentencing guidelines when you take the stand and you lie related to it. So when you add up all those things, the Department of Justice said, Judge, if you accurately apply the sentencing guidelines, all the enhancements, the additive things, and you total this up, and his background, it's 16 and a half years. That's what you need to give him. Now, the Department of Justice knows the judge you're dealing with and knows this judge does not give out big sentences at all. He cuts everything in half. So I assume that in the back of their mind, they're hoping for 7 or 8 years from this judge. But we won't know until there's a sentencing hearing, at which time I'm sure Hodges, police officer Hodges, will testify again as a victim. And then the judge is the one that makes the ultimate decision in meting out the sentence, and that will be done in the next couple of months. But that's what we have so far. We've got the choice here, but look at this interesting choice. This defendant took a look at the judge and decided he'd rather put his life and liberty in the hands of a Trump-appointed judge and try to argue for a lesser sentence or maybe an acquittal than do it in front of a jury of his peers. Interesting calculation, turned out probably right for him. I mean, the best that his lawyer could say in his sentencing memo in favor of a lower sentence was, well, my client was just mistaken about the facts around the 2020 election. That's all. It was just a mistaken set of facts that led him to savagely beat 2 law enforcement after they'd been restrained and were prone, trying to gouge out their eyes and crush the life out of them. And that's based on a series of misunderstandings. Let's see if this Trevor McFadden judge has the brass ones, the jurisprudential approach, the proper sober assessment without regard to politics to send this animal away for as long as the sentencing guidelines provide. Unfortunately, I'm reasonably confident I'm going to be back on a hot take in the next 90 days to report that he did not do that and that he cut the sentence in half. And this is the problem we're having. Everybody complains about on the right, MAGA right. They almost want to argue that only Republican judges and Republican prosecutors should go after Donald Trump and other Republicans. And I guess if you flip the coin, only Democrats for Democrats. But that's not our system. We don't have a nonpartisan system of justice. That's why the podcast that I co-anchor on Wednesdays and Saturdays, Legal AF on the MeidasTouch network, we say it sits at the intersection of law and politics. It's politically charged cases is what we cover, because you can't take the politics unfortunately, out of most of this rulemaking. Tell me the judge, tell me the circuit, tell me the appellate division or branch, and tell me state or federal, and I'll tell you with a high degree of certainty what the result is going to be. Now, I shouldn't be able to tell you that as a practicing lawyer and analyst. I should be able to say justice is blind. And when you put it through a process, when it comes out the other side, it doesn't matter what judge or prosecutor is sitting there. But we know that's not true because we look at the Trumpers, almost all of them, whether it's Judge Kaczmarek in Amarillo, Texas, ruling against a woman's right to choose to use medicated abortion because he wants to shove down the throat and other bodily parts of America and women his religious beliefs. Or now I got to worry, and we have to worry, and justice has to worry about Judge Trevor McFadden in the D.C. Circuit Court, who is going to issue his own brand of justice, which is infected with politics and his sense or belief. Now, no one is better positioned to have heard all the evidence and seen all the videos and all the social media. I mean, we're not going to show them, but you can go look up what McCaughey did. Every video of it is out there. And this judge saw it all and said, you can go home for home confinement instead of staying in the jail. So that judge is the one we got to worry about because of his political persuasion. I'd love to say that justice is blind, but we see time and time again, especially when it's in the hands of the Republicans, that it is not. And we're going to continue to bring to your attention cases like this as they come up that sit at that intersection of law and politics. I do hot takes like this. I used to say every day, but technically it's been about every hour, given the era that we're in 2023, co-anchoring that podcast, Legal AF, on the MeidasTouch Network on Wednesdays and Saturdays with Karen Friedman-Ignifilo and Ben Meiselas. And then you can follow me on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs. It wasn't rigged, you're just a loser. At store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.